is a monumental issue. It really is something that is a challenge for all of humanity right now. But there's promise, and I hope what you see in my recording is that I recognize the peril, and we all need to, but I think we all need to recognize the promise as well. So enjoy the talk.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to start my talk by diving right into this and talking about why climate change. Well, I've been in this area researching, studying, writing for about 15 years. And I've got a lot of information that I want to share. Over those 15 years, my team, my teammates and I have created different ways in which we're getting this message out. One of the big and cool ones is this Students on Climate Change, where we take students from around the world to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Conference of Parties, where the decisions are being made. We've been doing that for, again, about a dozen years, and out of that has come these 3 different books, and these books have been edited by our team. Our team is educators and a professional writer, and we've also written for those. So we've written chapters in those, but primarily our students on climate change have written those chapters. We also put on teacher workshops and some very successful workshops, and we're trying to educate, okay? So that's my perspective, and that's where I'm coming from. So I want to start with a question, because this is important. Can you think of another time in history when science education held such an important role in world progress? And can you think of another time in history when scientists had amassed so much information, so much data on what's going on a global scale? And yet, there are powerful factions that are trying to dissuade the public that climate change is not real, climate change is not happening. I think you know better. So let's dive into the perils of carbon dioxide, and then I want to make sure that you understand that there's promise. Okay, so we're going to focus on that as well. But what are the perils of carbon dioxide? Well, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and the greenhouse effect is extremely important to our planet. If we didn't have a greenhouse effect, our planet would not be habitable. And so what we're worried about, the peril in this story, is the human-enhanced greenhouse effect. That's us. That's us pumping CO2 up into the atmosphere. We'll talk a lot about how much, but if you look at this picture over here, we're filling up a balloon out of an exhaust pipe, and that balloon fills up a lot faster than you might think. You put about 20 of those together, and you've got about 1 kilogram of CO2. And it takes minutes to actually generate that much out of the back of your exhaust. And so that's all going up into the atmosphere. That's what we're worried about. So what else is going up there in terms of a greenhouse gas? One of the things is methane, CH4, natural gas. You've heard a lot about that. It's supposed to act as a bridge, and in some respects it can, but it's still a fossil fuel, and so it's still producing CO2. Less than we produce in other forms of fossil fuel burning, yet still producing it. When we look at a problem that I use in freshman chemistry, right, we look at something called stoichiometry. And stoichiometry is not as scary as you might think. Stoichiometry is simply the comparison of this C8H18, which we would call octane, to the amount of CO2 that's being produced, right? And so that comparison is what we're going to use in a minute to solve this freshman chemistry problem. But I want to talk a little bit about this infrared region of the electromagnetic spectrum, because that's what's being absorbed by these greenhouse gases, right? And that being absorbed actually traps the heat in our atmosphere, and our temperature is rising. But if we go back to this problem and think about, okay, back in 2007, we burnt 3.5 times 10 to the 15th grams of gasoline. That's a lot of gasoline, right? And how much CO2 did that produce? Well, again, using the stoichiometry of 2 to 16, we can first convert to moles, because that's what that comparison is. And then we use that ratio to go to moles of CO2, and we come back to grams of CO2. Those grams of CO2, we can then say, how about comparing that to what we call a natural forcing? Volcanic activity, one of the most important, if not the most important, producer of CO2 on a natural level. Well, that comparison gets us down to this 1.8%, meaning that volcanic activity is actually 1.8% of what we do just burning gasoline. Think about fossil fuels. It's not just gasoline. Fuel oils, coal, all of those different fossil fuels are also adding to this. And so there is hope, right? This is something called Project DRAWDOWN. They've amassed 100 different things that we're currently doing that if we bring to scale, this is going to help solve this crisis, right? And what they do is they estimate the amount of CO2 savings over here in these two columns. One of them is for if we want to hold it to 1.5. One of them is if we're only trying to hold it to 2 degrees, okay? Rise in temperature. And that's degrees Celsius, so that's a little bit more in terms of Fahrenheit. But we're going to start off with plant-rich diets. And plant-rich diets means essentially cut out the middleman. Cut out the ruminant, right? The cow that actually eats the grass, that produces the meat. If we're then eating plants directly, we don't use all those resources to get the meat, right? And another effect is ruminants actually produce methane. Cows burp up methane, right? And that methane goes up into the atmosphere, and it's another source of greenhouse gas. So what about the perils of an increasing amount of CO2 and temperature? Because that's an important part to follow as well. And if we look at this graph is showing the concentration of carbon dioxide on the top there and the temperature on the bottom in the orange. That concentration of carbon dioxide is increasing dramatically in the last 100 years, right? And that increase has never been seen before. If you look at it in a blown up view in just a second, you'll see what I'm talking about. But where is this coming from? This ancient air samples, right? Ice cores, drill about a mile down, right, in Antarctica, and pull up that ice core, and we can slice that thing down, and we can figure out exactly how much CO2 was in there from these trapped bubbles. But we can also follow the temperature from the way in which that ice was formed. And so if we look at this CO2, right, and just blow that up, what do we see? Well, it's never been above 300. Over 1 million years, right? We weren't around very long on this graph. And over 1 million years, it's never gone above 300 yet. In 1950, it was already above it. We are off the charts now, right? We're up above 400, around 415 today. Temperature follows, because once that gets pumped up into the atmosphere, it traps heat. When it traps that heat, the temperature is going to go up, right? And so you can see the light blue line here, and the dark blue line is the CO2. They're following, right? And so now you see this going up to 415, and that blue line, a light blue line, is going to follow. That trend is going to follow. Okay, so the temperature is going to continue to rise. So ice core data gives us, right, the million years, but we have actual instrumental record. Dave Keeling started this in the 1950s, and it continues today. It's out in Hawaii, in Mauna Loa. Why Mauna Loa? Because it's in the middle of the ocean, right? Not very much effect from anything surrounding it. And so we can get a very accurate measurement of the CO2. And if you saw that little, that ziggly line, right, that sawtooth pattern, what is that? Well, this is why we're so confident of this data. It's because we can see the earth breathing. When plants go dormant, they actually start producing more CO2. When plants are growing, they're actually taking in more CO2 than they produce. And so what the effect is this seasonal breathing, right, that we can see. Again, letting us know that we have a very accurate reading of CO2 in the atmosphere. Again, there's promise because we can look at health and education. It's a huge issue, right? It's something that we can start to work on, and as we start to work on that, right, we're going to reduce the amount of CO2. Focus in on this for a second. Girls are not educated as well in many countries, right? There are a lot of financial reasons, there are a lot of social reasons, all sorts of things like that. But when girls then grow up and become heads of households, as they do in many countries, they don't then have the knowledge to make choices that are going to combat climate change. So education is huge in this whole endeavor, okay? The perils of rising seas, right? You probably remember Superstorm Sandy. It was exacerbated by rising sea level, right? Well, look at what's happening. Rising sea levels are a combination of temperature. So the temperature of the oceans is going up. When that temperature goes up, it expands, water expands. And so now we also have water coming off of land. Think glaciers, think Antarctica, think Greenland. As those melt, that goes into the ocean, and we have these rising sea levels. So this is a very significant problem. And when we say as scientists that it's very likely to continue, we mean greater than 90%, okay? So the likelihood is extreme, right? It is going to continue to melt. What happens when sea levels rise? Well, look at all these low-lying areas. Florida, right? The coast. All low-lying areas that are going to be underwater if the sea level continues to rise at the rate it does. But I want to focus for a second on Bangladesh, because Bangladesh has a gigantic area where the sea level rise is going to cause land to disappear. What happens when land disappears? People have to move. What happens when people have to move? We have climate refugees. When we have climate refugees, the Pentagon says this is a national security threat multiplier. Right? Think back to Syria and the civil war and what happened when there were refugees from that. It was a huge disruption around the world. So the North Pole is melting, right? And in fact, the poles are warming 3 times faster than the equator, okay? So this is going to cause its own problems, but that's why the poles are melting so fast. The South Pole is melting. What's the South Pole? Antarctica. I already said that's a landmass ice, right? So that's going directly to sea level rise, okay? If you put together Greenland and Antarctica, both landmass ice melting, you have a significant issue, right? That ice is melting, it's going directly into the oceans, and we have sea level rise. Glaciers are another issue. Glaciers, again, land-based, directly into the ocean, but glaciers are also significant in that they supply a lot of the fresh water for the world's population. So another issue that is exacerbated by climate change. But let's look at what we can do. What's the promise here? The promise is that we can reduce food waste. In this paragraph over here on the left, it says roughly 1/3 of the world's food is never eaten, meaning it goes directly to waste. Imagine what we could do if we saved that food, distributed that food, didn't waste that food, right? So there is promise, but we have to deal with things like weather perils at this point. And again, we'll talk some more about promise. But what's going on? This 3 times faster, these poles warming at 3 times the rate of the equator. What that's doing is that's creating less of a temperature differential between the pole and the equator, and that's causing the jet stream to become wobbly, right? And a wobbly jet stream means more extreme weather events, okay, and changing weather patterns. It's not a direct impact, right? I mean, climate change, the impacts of climate change are not always directly related, but they exacerbate things. All the water that comes down in a given, let's say, month or year is going to remain about the same. It's just going to come down much faster, right, in a very short period of time. When that happens, right, the growth is enormous. And in wildfires, that's important because when that grows fast, that means that the undergrowth is growing very quickly. And then you have these extreme drought periods, and that undergrowth dies. That's now a tinderbox for forest fires. So it's a threat multiplier, right? It enhances the threat. Billion-dollar disasters, right? How many billion-dollar disasters did we have last year? How many billion-dollar disasters did we have, starting in the 2000s? They're incredible, right? If we could just cut this down, right? If we could just remove many of these disasters by dealing with this climate change issue, we would save money, right? And that savings would go a long ways to solving our crisis. There's hope, there's promise. There are many, many people working on this. There are books out there. In fact, here's a dozen books just from last year. And I challenge you to learn more about this topic. And as you learn more about this topic, share it with your friends, with your family. I look forward to talking more with you about this. Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Dr. Foy, thank you so much. What a great presentation. So before we jump into our question and answer, is there anything that you want to add to your presentation? Like as you're viewing it, was there something that you wish that you had added? Any other kind of information to share with the group?
Sure, except it would take several hours, and I don't think anybody's ready to sit on this Zoom for that long. There's just so much. There's so much evidence. There's so much to talk about in terms of the impacts of climate change. And like I said in the video, these 100 different things that we can do. We just the world's got to get on board. The U.S. has to get on board, and we need to challenge ourselves to meet this crisis head on.
Okay, what questions do we have? Can put them in the chat or yep. Go ahead, Dailies. You're on mute.
There, we're techno savvy. In looking at the COVID situation and how much misinformation there is about COVID, and thinking about climate, I just can't see how we can convince 1/3 of our nation that this is a problem. Do you have any ideas on, besides, I mean, the obvious is education, but they're not believing in education.
Well, so yeah, you kind of stole my answer, because I believe that it is education. I really do, and I think that it's education from at the source. So we mentioned teacher workshops. There's a lot of evidence that I didn't present in the presentation, but there's a lot of evidence that says teachers aren't teaching this, and the evidence says teachers aren't teaching this because teachers weren't taught this. And when teachers are not comfortable with material, they are not comfortable teaching it. And then when they are exposed to differing opinions, they want to be fair in what they present. And there are no sides in climate. There's actually a lot of signs that we see at these COPs that say there are no sides in climate, and that means that it is what it is, right? To coin the one of the phrases of our students, it is what it is, in that we know what's going on. We know what's going on. The scientific evidence is robust. The scientific evidence is immense, and there's no debate. There's no other side. And so I think that is what gets lost in all the rhetoric, right? Is that there is this perception that, oh, there's another side to this, and there isn't. So I think that is the crucial part of the education process.
Okay, we have a question in the chat that says, are there any initiatives that the faculty of York College is doing collectively to further the advancement of climate change literacy and chances for students to engage in this topic while students at YCP?
That is just an excellent question. And fortunately, I have a great answer. And the answer is yes. Our college president, Dr. Gunter Smith, formed the Presidential Task Force on Sustainability. And that task force is a college-wide task force. It has, I'm a member of it. It has other faculty on it. It has, I think, the same number of students as faculty, actually. And then it has folks from facilities, folks from administration, and we're all working towards developing initiatives that surround sustainability. And one of the core issues of sustainability is tackling the climate change issue. So excellent question. And yes, absolutely, students, faculty, administrators, everybody can get involved in this on our campus.
Great. There is a question in the chat, another question in the chat. What countries or regions are serving as good examples to combat the negative effects of climate change? In other words, who can we look to at the moment for best practices?
That is, if I didn't know better, I would think that was a planted question, because there's a country that my colleague Keith Peterman and I have visited quite frequently. Also, actually, Rick and Marilyn Daly. It's Costa Rica. Costa Rica is I think I could say the world leader in climate change. Costa Rica had a goal of becoming climate neutral. I mean, there were some, conditions on it, but climate neutral in 2020. And the last time I looked, I believe they were able to do that. And in fact, there was a significant amount of time where they were carbon negative. And so they have the model for the world. They have diversified their energy portfolio, right? They have a lot of wind, they have a lot of geothermal, they have a lot of solar, they have a lot of renewable energy. They're still, along with the world, trying to tackle the transportation sector, and so that's probably one of the biggest things we face. We need to stop driving fossil fuel burning cars, and we have the technology. We need the infrastructure, and we need more affordable vehicles. And again, as Keith and I have talked about on numerous occasions, we really need a different mode of transportation, but maybe that's not within our lifetime, but we certainly within our lifetime could get a significant shift towards renewable vehicles.
Okay.
I started to type, but I'll just ask the question. So, Dr. Foy, what would be the priorities? If we can't do everything all at once, what would be the priorities that would have the largest impact? You were just talking about like cars, and I know like GM now is having a whole, I think it's GM is having like a whole series of electric cars. And I don't know if that's actually, you know, whether it's affordable or not, but what would be the priorities that would have the largest impact?
I think that our first priority is the energy sector. I would say if we could solve the the energy sector and stop burning fossil fuels and switch to renewables, that's probably one of the biggest emitters outside of transportation. That's where we are starting. It's not political, right? Coal is not going to be used in the future. It is on the decline. It continues to decline. There is no way that that gets resurrected by anyone because coal is not affordable, and renewables are becoming more and more affordable. And renewables actually are more affordable than coal right now, and they're overtaking they're overtaking other sources, oil, fuel oils, and things like that. So it is happening on an economic front, right? Which is one of the things that I also see as extreme promise, right? If we can get our economy actually driving this switch to renewables, I think that that's going to be a real key to solving the issue.
I guess that's my concern is, you know, there's the science to back it up. There are educational routes and initiatives that we can put in place. But what about the fact that our government is bought and sold by big oil? You know, what are we going to do until they're not making billions of dollars from lobbyists?
That's, yeah, I think that is one of the challenges. And I am cautiously optimistic about that, because the evidence that we're seeing on an international scale is that there is a significant move towards renewables, and that move is outpacing, if you will, the political strife that comes with trying to make these things happen. And so at this point, there seems to be a grip by as you kind of said, big oil, right? But I think that grip is starting to loosen, and I really think we're going to see just a significant shift in the coming years towards renewable energy.
Stephen, jump in there.
So in our township, I'm part of our EAC, Environmental Advisory Committee. And, we've luckily had really good engagement with our commissioners, and, we've adopted the Ready for 100 program. And so we're doing that analysis at a municipality level and looking to meet those goals of 2030 and 2035 and 2050, for the municipality. What have you seen in terms of programs like Costa Rica or other areas to help people to drive adoption or to look at this? Because I mean, from our perspective and my own personal perspective, moving to solar for my own home and electric for my car, it initially was a financial choice for me. I was able to make the financial argument that it made sense to reduce my energy consumption by being more efficient. And I've since, gone hog wild in terms of composting and,
That's
other
awesome.
efforts to minimize footprint. But, I think I'm still on the edge of that. And it's can we get our friends and neighbors to adopt these programs or to understand the downstream impacts of just avoiding putting stuff into the waste stream or avoiding that consumption, that energy use that you can't see.
So my answer to this is education. And I will keep going back to that, but that's not the answer you're looking for right now. But that I really do think that we have got to educate the next generation, because they're the ones that are going to feel the deepest impact. And we're not doing it. We're not doing it now. We are just not doing it. Pennsylvania recently got an F for our education concerning climate change. And you might say, well, we have natural gas, right? So obviously that would be an impediment. Well, no, there are states like Alaska that got A's. So it's not all about what we're doing as a state in terms of production. So that's kind of the first thing. The next thing is what we've seen just in the last, let's say, 10 years, where Tesla went from producing a $150,000 car to now producing, the base sticker is supposed to be 35, but a car that is somewhere in the realm of, people can start to afford it. So where did that come from? Well, that came from investment, and that came from, and that was private investment, right? That came from private investment. That came from partnerships. So Tesla partnered with Panasonic, and they're building these batteries, and they're building these batteries in massive production. Well, that's what brings costs down, right? I mean, the first Model T was way too expensive, but then the assembly line, and now everybody was buying one, and so now these batteries are now affordable. And so as Danny pointed out, right, GM is saying, look, we are going to have an entirely electric fleet by 2050. How are they going to do that? Well, it's because of, again, the battery technology, the up and coming, technology in all electric vehicles. I just saw a quick headline, I think it was this morning, about how electric semis are actually more efficient than diesel burning semis. So they're cheaper to operate. So those are the kinds of things that have to continue, right? And those are the kinds of things that I think we all have to get behind. And I'm glad you said composting, because I've been trying to get my wife to do, no, I'm just kidding. We've been trying to do composting, and we keep saying, oh, well, we'll do it next summer. We'll start it up next, and we need to do it, right? And I think everybody needs to be more aware of how we can take care of the environment. I mean, that's the bottom line here, is that, all of this is because we're not taking care of our environment, and we need to start doing a better job at that.
I might have a follow-up question. It's actually the last three that were being asked. Your thoughts, your thoughts on carbon pricing, because I think this is what the last three were really sort of talking, getting to, is there's an article this morning, and it was about a Wall Street administrator of some sort, saying that the companies are going to now have to be required for their investments to start putting in the factoring in the cost of environmental damage and carbon pricing. And I guess we're not hearing as much about that now, and it's related to education.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the whole carbon pricing, environmental costs, and actually putting the prices right up front so it levels the field?
Right. This is why Keith and I work so well together. He sets me up. But yeah, I mean, so the idea that you pump this stuff out of the ground and you refine it and then you sell it and then people drive around and burn it, and the cost is what we pay at the pump. No, not at all, right? I mean, the cost of what we're doing is exactly what you're talking about, right? It is, what is the actual cost of burning that gallon of gas, right? And how do you, I mean, we know how to measure it, right? We know how to measure it. We know what it's doing. We know where it's going. We know a lot of the environmental impacts. We could put a price on that. I can guarantee everybody on this call would say, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I'm not going to pay that for gas. But if we start to implement pricing that actually reflects some of what's going on, then we begin to actually bring in some money that could then lead to more production of sustainable fuels, that could lead to more investigation into sustainable fuels, that could, all of those things that happen when you actually are requiring these companies to pay the real cost of what they're doing, and requiring us as consumers to pay the real cost of what we're doing. And so absolutely, that unfortunately that gets like it gets a really bad rap, right? I mean, people hate calling it a carbon tax because nobody likes taxes, right? They don't really like cap and trade. They don't like any of these mechanisms. So, we'll call it something else, but it's still going to be a tax, right? And you're right, Keith, until we get to that point, as a society, until we get to that point and accept that we really have to pay the piper, right? And we have to do it sooner than later, or we're not going to get this under control.
A lot of arguments that you see in terms of not or an unwillingness to adopt something new or to change of behavior. You generally see things like, oh, well, wind and solar aren't necessarily sustainable. You saw that in the Texas winter storms where they, were blaming the renewables when in reality it was just a lack of preparedness,
right.
By the utility. But then you also have things like, oh, well, you still have to deal with lithium batteries and those other technologies and their end of life. And, they're not exactly non-toxic, and having to deal with them. So, how, and I think that's a little more at the fore as people's minds versus, well, what about, the fossil fuels and their actual impact and things like that, especially in communities where, the coal or the oil or the gas is extracted, but, they don't necessarily reap the benefits. How can we counter those types of arguments in those discussions?
Well, so, we've been talking about climate change as a significant issue. And one of the things that we've started talking about as climate scientists is this is a climate emergency. And, the short answer to that is if we don't solve this, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do with the lithium battery at end of life. It doesn't matter what you do with any of these other issues because we're not going to be able to live on this planet ultimately, right? As these temperatures increase. I mean, what I tried to do in the talk was say, you know, there's a lot of danger here, but there's a lot of hope. But you know, we could pull out some of the IPCC charts that show some pretty frightening things, and those frightening things are going to happen, you know, at 2.5 degrees rise, at 3 degrees rise. You know, God forbid it goes to 5 degrees, because that is just it's catastrophic. And so I as a scientist, as somebody who is very interested in the environment, I get all of those issues, and I totally agree with all of those issues, but I can't deal with those until we solve this one. And I think that we have to, again, through this education process, we have to really let people know what kind of emergency we're facing. And I think if they can recognize that, I think that they will look beyond the issues that come from lithium batteries until we've solved this or turned this around, and then we'll change our focus and go after, you know, how do we safely dispose of lithium batteries.
Dr. Foy, there's a question in the chat about solar paneling. Is it really affordable and effective? I guess it's a return on investment question.
Yes. So let me just give you a little insight into affordability. I have solar panels on my roof. I did not pay a cent for those solar panels. The company, actually Tesla now owns the company that put them up there. They sell me the electricity. That electricity is actually sold to me at a lower rate than MedEd, because when they put them up, they guaranteed that the price would not go up. I think it was more than 3% a year, 5% a year, something like that. And typical utilities are going up at a clip of, you know, 10, maybe even 15% a year. So my electricity is more affordable year over year, and I didn't have to invest anything. Now there are other options, right? You can lease the panels, and you know, you then own that electricity, right? You don't pay anything for your electricity. You pay to lease the panels. You can buy the panels, and again, that's a significant upfront investment, but you know, you now are generating your own electricity. You look at your electricity bill over the course of a year, and you know, maybe your return is 10 years down the road, and then you're getting free electricity.
It is.
That continues to fall too, right? I mean, as solar cells become more efficient, as again production costs are lowered, those panels are more and more and more affordable.
And I can attest with my own solar installation that we purchased them and had them installed a number of years ago, and it absolutely pays for itself. You have to look at it. You're not going to pay for it within 5 years. You're talking about a lifespan of 20 to 25 years for your system. You're paying it back in 10 years. And if the costs continue to rise for the electricity, you're going to get the payback sooner, because you're not outlaying that money to cover that. It's absolutely worth doing.
Right.
Stephen, do you guys have a battery to
do not.
store?
No, we're still grid tied. I chose not to do 100%, because with Pico, the best you can do is to zero out your bill. So I could do 100% coverage, zero out my bill, but in the peak months of the summer, I'd be giving them a lot of free electricity, which I didn't want to do. So I chose to just partially cover my house, so I'm still grid tied. I am looking at battery systems. I'm starting to look at that, and I'm looking at to probably expand our solar system, our solar installation, to ideally get to 100% if I can. And I would back that up with a battery system as well to level everything out.
And to plug your car in when you come home, right?
Yes, I do already have a charging station, because my wife and I have hybrids.
That's
So,
awesome.
and my next car after that will probably be a full electric at that point. So
yeah, we both have are driving hybrids right now as well. Mine's a plug-in hybrid. The other one is just a straight hybrid. But yeah, so and actually a plug for York College. There's a charging station on campus, and so I go in the morning a couple times a week and plug my car in and let it charge, and then I've got 30 miles of charge on that, where I can go back and forth to work, probably about 15 times, and it's awesome.
I have a question about Costa Rica is the perfect example, but how do they do it? I know they have wind, they have solar, but they don't have electric cars that much, do they?
No.
So, and you were emphasizing that fossil fuel run cars are a big problem.
Yeah.
But how did Costa Rica do it? Could we do it and still have our fossil cars? Or are we just such a glut with so much fossil fuel cars that we couldn't?
No, it is. So they have not tackled their transportation sector, right? So this they're going carbon neutral was in their other sectors, and it doesn't include transportation. There are, that is the big issue, right? And again, that's kind of that's gonna follow the economic impact. And so, again, you go back to GM saying, and I may be misremembering that it's 2050. I think it might be earlier that they say they're going to have an all electric fleet. And other major car companies, I think Volvo has said, they're going to be all electric within the next 15 years or something like that. And I assume that Ford has something that they've put out. I just maybe haven't seen it, and that's going to be the driver of getting off of fossil fuels in the transportation sector. But Costa Rica is also doing a lot more just on environmental issues in general, right? You guys know all of the land use that they have turned around and put into reserves, right? And all of the forests that they have allowed to regenerate. And it's a relatively small country, but they have taken so much of their land and made sure that they're allowing it to go back into the natural habitat. So there is, in that regard, I think it's complex the way that the United Nations does the counting, and so I think that it's through that mechanism that they have made their pledge of carbon neutrality, and it doesn't include transportation, unfortunately. I would love to see that. I'd love to see all electric vehicles down there. Then they would truly be the absolute model for the world. Yeah.
It looks like we have time for maybe just one more question. Does anybody want to toss anything out there?
I'll throw one more out. Sticking to the state of Pennsylvania, what are your thoughts on or the likelihood of us joining the RGGI?
So that's the regional cap and trade. Is that what you're referring
Yeah.
to? Yeah. So what I thought at one point Pennsylvania was actually in. Is that true or not?
No, they've just finished up an open comment period from the DEP to get feedback on it, and obviously the governor wants to join it,
Yeah.
but not everybody else does. And there's been recent, there's about 10 other states I think that have been doing it, or a number of other states have been doing it for over a decade in it, and have been able to show the benefits of it.
Yeah.
And in fact, we've kind of benefited some of it because there are states around us that are in it.
Right. I mean,
So-
it's the Northeast region that's
Right.
that's really most of the states. Yeah. I mean, if the governor, I think, has any say in this, I believe that it'll happen. Obviously he's fighting a legislature that doesn't agree. But I think we're hopeful. Like you said, if we can, get, maybe that's a key, right? Is all of us get on and comment, and make sure that we get our voices in to the DEP and really help drive it. Those are definitely the kinds of things that need to happen. You see the alliance on the West Coast, right, where you got Washington, Oregon, and California, and they're just doing fantastic things with climate change, and talking about building these corridors where we're going to be able to drive our electric vehicles and have charging stations all over, and all of that infrastructure that we need the government really to step in and help with. So yeah, I really hope that's something that could happen.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Dr. Ford, do you have any some quick last minute comments for everybody? Everybody should go out and read a book.
That would be outstanding. And yeah, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I have been delightfully surprised at the the thoughtful conversation that we've had. I think it's really important to engage, right? I mean, I think sometimes it's an isolating thing to worry about these problems, and we've all kind of experienced this as a world in the middle of this pandemic. Well, we're in the middle of another crisis, and how do we solve that crisis? We solve it by working together, and that starts with talking about it and learning about it. And I go back to my education piece, because that's what I do, and I think it's the most important thing that we can all do. So yeah, read a book. That would be awesome.
And
Dr. Foy, I'm gonna head to camp this summer and be molding some young minds. So that's my plan, is some environmental education and youth development. So I'll help out.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Fantastic. I would be happy to be a resource anytime.
And I can tell you, Dr. Foy, you can compost, because we've been doing it for years. And you can also, still buy into the consumerism, because I didn't want a bunch of garbage on my counter, but they make good grips, and they make these really cute little counter buckets,
Nice.
So you throw your banana peel in there. It has a lid. No one has to see or smell. And then every couple days you walk your bucket out to the big bucket in the yard. So we used to keep it just in an open chicken wire thing, but then the dogs were eating. So
Right.
we did have to buy a covered one. But it's amazing, and it's actually kind of fun. And then we take the compost and we do almost like garden lasagna. So you do compost, leaves, churn it up, beautiful garden. So
That's fantastic.
yeah.
You're you got us excited.
Yeah,
That'll be cool.
yeah, it's fun.
And we only got pumpkins once. So don't put your pumpkin seeds out.
Oh,
in
you don't put the seeds.
Unless you want pumpkins.
They'll take over the garden.
They will.
I bet.
Okay. So again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We strongly encourage everybody to go out to the website and check out the rest of the Spartan Speaks schedules. There are some really interesting and fantastic topics coming up. So we hope to see your faces again. If you go to the main YCP website and you just type in Spartan Speaks in the search box, the schedule is going to come right up for you. So thank you all for joining us. Oop,
Thank you.
I'm putting my email in the chat.
Okay.
There we go.
Yep, I won't close out yet.
That's got it. Yeah. So if anyone wants any more information, please feel free to contact me. If you don't get this off the chat, go to the York College website and I'm on there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a nice night, everyone. There we go.
Woo!
Right, it was awesome, right?
That was fun. Yeah, I enjoyed that. That was really cool.
You know what, Greg, while I have you here, can I ask you a quick question? So we have a relative who works in LNG, liquefied natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, is that any better than natural gas, or I don't think it's considered a renewable.
No, I mean, it's still, so that's kind of more of a, I would say, transportation issue, right? How do you get it from one place to another? And if you can liquefy it, it's a lot easier to transport because you can get more of it, right?
Yeah, and it's actually a South American not invention. What's the word?
The transportation and the function, the machines that they use are from South America.
They're from South America, made in China, but the technology and the owner
Argentina
is Argentine. But what they're doing is in Pennsylvania, which is interesting, they're going to the abandoned wells. So the bad stuff, if I'm understanding it correctly, has already been done. And they go and they put these cryo boxes on top of the abandoned wells and pull out the remaining natural gas, liquefy it, and then take it around.
Yeah, there's some yeah, so some of the stuff that we didn't talk about is if we were just more efficient at some of the things that we're doing, we can gain a little bit, right? I mean, we have to get off, bottom line, we have to get off of burning fossil fuels. But if we can, in our efforts to get off them, be more efficient, then we'll burn less, right? That would be a starting point. The whole thing with burning natural gas is actually, it produces less CO2, right? For the amount of energy that you get from it, it produces less CO2 than something like oil, gasoline, coal, for sure. And so that is how we have saved a lot of the CO2 from going up in the atmosphere, is because it is a better fossil fuel.
Right.
It's still a fossil fuel, but it's better, right? So that has actually was what allowed us to meet the metrics that we set in the Paris Agreement. So you know, when we first joined and put our pledge in and all that kind of stuff, that was the way in which we got to it, right? So we were able to do what we said we were going to do as a country because there was that shift to natural gas.
Wow.
And that was because of, you know, everybody's heard of the Marcellus Shale and all that stuff. That was because of the availability of natural gas and how easily you could get it. And then again, that led to less CO2 pollution. So yeah, we have to do all these things.
Right.
And we have to, you know, I think that all of them allow us to make progress. But in the end, we just got to stop burning it.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you. I don't want to take up any more of your evening.
Well, thanks a lot. And thank you guys for moderating, and you know, thanks for asking me to do this. It was cool.
All right. Great.
Thank you.
And have a great
All right.
night.
Thanks. You too.